chop chop chop, judo flip, chop chop judo flip, judo flip.
Hello there, the scientist here. Before the episode proper begins, there are a number of announcements that I would like to make, which were left out during the recording of the episode itself. Firstly, apologies. Apologies for the extreme tardiness in the release of the episode. Even though it was announced way back in November, there was actually a recording done then in November, but it turns out it could not be used, and the episode had to be recorded. The editing, however, was unexpectedly complicated by a compounding number of factors, and that is the reason the episode couldn't be finished until now. Secondly, the podcast is now even more widely available. In addition to AudioMac and Google Podcasts, you can now follow and listen to the podcasts on Anchor and Spotify. So listen to the show on your favorite platforms, and please like, follow the show, and share with others too. There are plans underway for the YouTube channel. However, further announcements will be made concerning that when the plans are ready. You can follow the show, however, on Facebook and Twitter at 0100 Niger. That's at 0100 Niger to keep up with such announcements and more. And lastly, another apology is in place here for the sound in the episode. The recording was done late at night with a new mic that I was still learning to use at the time. I tried as much as I could to level out the sound during the editing, but there's only so much that I could do about that. So that's it. I'll let you continue to the podcast episode now. Enjoy.
Hello there, and welcome to 0100 Niger. Welcome back if you are a returning listener, returning member of the audience, and welcome for the first time if this is the first time you're joining us on this podcast, the Nigerian Review Podcast. It's been a long, tough year, and even though this episode had been ready, the script at least had been ready for over a month now, and even though I've attempted to record it at least twice in the past month, this episode almost didn't happen, but I had to make it happen. And talking about me, I am your host, Leftist Scientist. My co-host is still unavailable, unfortunately. Hopefully we'll sort the situation with that out with time. But talking about this episode, I had to struggle to make it happen, and here we are. It's happening at least. It's the comeback episode for 0100 Nigerian Review Podcast. To believe it's about a year already since the last episode, so we couldn't stop. Right, not now. We know all good things come to an end, is what they say, right? But not 0100 Niger, at least not yet, because there's some trouble we still need to cause. There's some mischief we need to manage, and there is changing the world that needs to be done. So there's no way the podcast could be dead just yet. No, it was only just hibernating. Well, that's a long hibernation period for a whole year, but yeah, I think you'll just have to go with that. So that's it. You're welcome back to the Nigerian Review Podcast, and as I said, you're grandly welcome for the first time, if that's what you are, a first-time listener. And I suppose to begin with, it will be important to restate and reiterate what this podcast is, what it means to me, and the purpose it's meant to serve. I know we did some of this in the first episode, the introductory episode. We discussed the goals we had in mind for the podcast, or rather, what we hope to do, what we plan to do with the podcast over time. And this will be as much for my own benefit as for the listeners too. Yeah, I think it's important for us to be able to put things back in perspective. It's been a long time. We've been in break for a long time. So if we are able to reiterate all that we plan and hope to do with the podcast, it could help me in, getting some of that much needed patience from my audience. And so maybe it will help make it easier for you to follow along with however the podcast gets to proceed from this point onward. Alright, so now let's delve into it. This is the comeback episode. You're welcome. Alright, so to start with the podcast. Why start the podcast? Why was the podcast started? Beginnings. What to do about them? Whether we are discussing the universe, life, or our dear nation, right? If we're talking about the beginnings, it's usually, in retrospect, right? The beginning already happened in the past, and then we sometime in the future get to sit down and look back at this thing that happened in the past and wonder, why did this happen, right? With the universe, we wonder, was there a force that caused the creation of the universe? With life, we wonder, what is the purpose of life? With the country, we wonder, what was the driving force behind the creation of this country? What was the ultimate purpose? Was there an ulterior motive that we, the people of the country, might not know about? And with the podcast, I'm the one asking the question now. I did 7 episodes, give or take, in the first couple of months of the podcast going live. So here I am, a year after all that, after going on hiatus throughout that entire period of that 1 year, looking back now and wondering, trying to reiterate to myself, why was it I started this podcast in the first place? Just trying to remind myself of that purpose, if only for the purpose of not losing steam again, at least not anytime soon, and getting back some of the motivation that informed the decision to start the podcast in the first place. So why start the podcast? It's rather simple, right? At least it seems so in my mind, thinking about why I started the podcast. I suppose this podcast was started because I saw a need in the society I live in. There were important discourses that need to be had. There are things that need to be discussed, need to be talked about in the public space that are either being underserved or totally ignored. And as we've come along, I've been hinting at some of them, and we'll talk about many more of these as time goes on with the podcast. But yeah, so the society I live in, that I grew up in, the Nigerian society, the Nigerian country I grew up in, it's alien, to say the least. And ever since that, I've been able to understand what's going on in the public discourse and what people generally talk about when they talk about the problems in the society and what goes on around me. People generally have found it hard to put their hands on what could be the particular problems of the society, right? And since everyone just wants to blame everything on, say, corruption, for example. That's the ultimate culprit for the problems of this country. Everyone just blames it on corruption. But then you get to think about it and you get to look at things critically and objectively, and you find out that corruption is actually not the problem. What it is a symptom, major symptom albeit, but it's a symptom nonetheless of the main issue. And you get to realize that when you see corruption, you usually are able to pin a reason down for it to a bigger problem that permits it to fester and to grow and to exist in that place. So ultimately you get to just realize that yes, corruption is a problem. It's a big problem, right? But it's not the problem. It doesn't just exist on its own. There are reasons for its existence where it does exist. But then what are these reasons? What exactly is the problem with this country? And then I got to grow up, I read, I got to know a lot about the world I live in, know much more about society I grew up in. Then you get to find out that many of the problems we face here in this country are actually not unique to us. And now that's I realize is one issue that people tend to either not realize or that they overlook when they discuss or analyze the issues with the country. And looking in the public sphere in the country today, go on Twitter, turn on your radio, listen to what people are saying, go on Facebook, see what people post on their walls. People tend to Nigerianize these issues, right? They say, oh, that's Nigeria for you, almost as if Nigeria exists in a vacuum apart from the rest of the world. And I've come to realize that this is not the case. If you know anything at all about how the world works, if you know anything about the history of any nation at all in the world, be it an African country, be it a country from outside Africa, be it any of the so-called developed nations, look into their history, look into their past, you find out that many of these societies have also had to battle with many of the issues that we are battling with today in some form of the other. You see that the issues we face in our country are even mirrored in many of these countries, not just in their past, even in their present. Yes, there are differences in many cases, such as they being able to deal with it in certain ways. But that was only able to happen after they have been able to put these issues in perspective the proper way and view them for what they are you can only solve a problem if you're able to grasp its true nature, right? So that's basically the reason for this podcast. I'm not going to claim now to have found the ultimate answer to life, the universe, and everything. I do not have such answers, and I believe anybody who says they have the answers are either naive or maybe they're just lying to you. So I do not have the answers, not all of them at least, but I intend to discuss the country. I call it the Nigerian Review Podcast. We're not just reviewing things. We're not reviewing products on the podcast. That's not why it's called the Nigerian Review Podcast. It's not because we want to bring products here on the podcast and review them. No, it's because we want to review Nigeria in itself. And the first 7 or so episodes, we're basically talking about Nigerian history, right? We went as far as 2,500 years ago, and we've been coming down from there ever since. So yeah, that's basically it. Review Nigeria, review Nigerian society, try to look at things from a new, different perspective, right? And we'll be talking a bit more about all that as time goes on, but that's basically it. So that's the first thing I wanted to get anyways, about what this podcast is and what do I aim to achieve with this. What do I aim to achieve with it? I aim to bring these issues, many of the issues that ail the country, to the fore, look at them from a different perspective, discuss them from that perspective, see if looking at things from that perspective and addressing them from there could actually help. Because everybody that tries to profile a solution to the problems of this country have always been saying the same thing, and they haven't been working, right? If they have been working, we won't still be where we are today. So yeah, what I hope to achieve with it is to discuss these issues from a new perspective to hopefully inspire some change in society. So this next issue is one that I've had a couple of listeners ask me about. What does the name of the podcast mean anyways? What's 0100? And one common question also in that vein has also been, how do you even pronounce this? So I think we answered this in the introductory episodes, right? With Ada and I. How do you say that with this English language? Is I and Ada or Ada and I? Anyways, so it's 0100, right? It's spelled 0100, the digits 01-00 digits, and it's pronounced 0100 Niger. And the rationale behind the name, what it means, in case you missed it in the first episode, or in case you weren't so clear enough in that episode. When you have companies, right, you have brands, and sometimes these companies have special numbers that you can call. Sometimes they are toll-free numbers, right, that you can call in order to get some more information about their products or their services. And sometimes these numbers, like I said, sometimes they are toll-free, right? So you can call them for free, you won't be charged for it. And so usually these toll-free numbers for these companies and these brands usually starts with something like you have like 0800, 0700. They come in varieties, sometimes you have 08000, 1234, 01234, something like that. So anyway, I hope you get the general gist about that. 0700, the brand name, 0800, 0100 sometimes. And so following that troop, you have 0100 Niger. The general idea behind that being that this is the podcast you tune into, you listen to get more information about Niger. Tune into this podcast to get more information than you would otherwise get elsewhere about Niger. Niger being, our colloquial name for our dear country, Nigeria. So that's the general idea. It's a great idea. Actually, 0100 Niger, tune into us for more information about Nigeria. Probably some information you've not heard somewhere else, hopefully. So I hope I've been able to clarify and not just muddle things up all the more with this little explanation. Alright, so that is that about the name and title of the podcast. So of course we call it the Nigerian Review Podcast, right? We're reviewing Nigeria, the Nigerian Review Podcast. So we are not a review podcast. It says that we're not reviewing products, right? So it's not just a Nigerian review podcast, but the N with the question mark is in the bracket. So we're not just a Nigerian review podcast. We're not reviewing products here. What we're reviewing is Nigeria. So it's actually the Nigeria Review Podcast that aims to review Nigeria, but it's also a Nigerian podcast. So it's the Nigerian Review Podcast, the Nigerian Review Podcast that is reviewing Nigeria. I hope that didn't just sound so confusing. It's the tagline for the podcast, right? 0100 Nigeria, the Nigerian review podcast. So I hope all that makes sense. So anyways, moving on now. At the beginning of this episode and in the last episode, the announcement episode 1, tag the announcement episode, the short one before this, I introduced myself as the leftist scientist, right? Prior to that, if you've been following the podcast or if you're new, you can listen to some of the previous episodes. I used to introduce myself as the scientist, as simple as that. Now I call myself a leftist scientist, and it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and of course, if you are familiar with the topic of the last episode, the last main episode, episode 7, the right-left spectrum, you'll of course understand what the new qualifier in the title mean, leftist. It's just a reflection of an ideology, the general ideology I currently espouse. I am originally the scientist. There are a number of reasons I go by that name. Principally, it's just because, well, it's a way I have chosen to look at things systematically, to look at the whole picture of things, look at the root cause of things, using something that is more akin to the scientific process than any other thing. So I am the scientist. Whatever issue it is I'm going to discuss, I try to discuss it systematically in that manner that is known with scientists. The scientists are known for. And over the past very few years, I've come to rather espouse the certain leftist ideologies and certain align myself with being a leftist rather than the status quo of the society that I grew up in. And so, yeah, I feel it would be more appropriate to let that reflect in the name I use, pseudonym if you like, that I go by online on this project of mine. And over time, as you'll get to see the topics we discuss and the direction I discuss it from, right? At least then you won't be so shocked. You'll understand, okay, this is where this dude is coming from. He's a leftist after all. He's the leftist scientist. So I think that should be clear enough for now. We might come to discuss it later on, but that's good enough for now, I think. So, going on now to probably the most important part of this episode. There are so many important parts in this episode, right? So, and what this is about why the long break. Why that long ass break? About a year in length. More than a year in length, right? Why did we have to go for such a long break? Why was the podcast absent from the airwaves for so long? Did it have to happen? Yes, it did have to happen. At the end, was that the end or in the middle of the 7th episode? That was the last episode that was released before the long break. Anyways, we made an announcement that me and Ada, who was still co-hosting the podcast at that time, we made the announcement that the podcast will be going on a break. At the time, of course, we didn't know how long the break was going to be, but we did say that the next time you're going to hear from the podcast was going to be way into the next year. And, the reason given was that the scientists had some sciencing to do. So basically, it shouldn't be that vague. But then the science and the scientists had to do was exams. We stated earlier on in the podcast history that we are both students, right? I am a student, I'm still a student. I had exams to write December last year, January. They were very important exams. The thoughts of them had me stressed. Thinking back then, right now, thinking back to that time still gets me stressed at times. But then, so of course, I anticipated the stress, and then I knew I had to make time to, really study, prepare for the exams. Well, thanks be to God, the exams went well. That was the primary reason, anyways, for why the podcast had to go on a break. I had to use December to study for the exams. But then that wasn't the reason why we couldn't give a timeline for the return of the podcast at that time. The other reasons were that I also had a number of things lined up for when I get through the exams. We'll be looking at what some of those things are. Now, this is a small talk episode basically. So from this point forward, for the next, couple of minutes, half an hour, for the next hour or so, this is just me doing small talk. Talking about how my past 1 year have been, what I've been up to. Alright, so you've been warned. If you're still listening, thank you. So what happened at that point? So December, I prepared for exams. I was preparing for exams. The exam happened January, early January. I wrote the exams. So what happened afterwards was that I actually belong to a number of associations here in school, and I hold offices in them. One of the offices I hold in one of the associations I belong to here, I hold the position of being the chief editor, basically, so to speak. So I was tasked with curating a magazine, compiling, designing, and publishing a magazine for the association. And the timeline then was so tight. The magazine was to be launched sometime in February, so I had very little time to work. After finishing my exams in early January, I had to quickly set to work compiling material for the magazine, editing them, basically single-handedly, and then set about to design them. Yeah, by the way, if you didn't know, I am also a graphic designer. I'm on a break from that presently, but yeah, graphic designer by profession, by reputation. Yeah, so I set to work after doing the editing. I set to work designing the magazine. Well, thankfully it was a purely digital edition, the magazine, so I didn't have to worry about printing, and I didn't have all the worries that came with that, of course. So I did all that throughout the month of January and well into February. As a matter of fact, I didn't finish job on the magazine until the eve of the launch, when I actually finished with I had to create like QR codes to link to the website where the magazine was hosted. So went my January and February. It went well. Well, the magazine got launched, and there were good reviews for the magazine. So, and then for the rest of my February, I had what you call family duties to attend to. So basically, there was a family event that was going to happen in the second week of March. So I had to do my part to contribute to that. So I started work on that late in February. Late in February, because the magazine was launched in the middle of February. I had to rest because I went through sleepless nights trying to put the magazine together. So I had to rest for about a week or so, and then late February I set to work, doing my part for the family event, and that took the rest of February, early March, and sometime around the last few days of the first week of March, I had to leave school and head home. Of course, principally, I had to leave school because I had to head home for the family event, but also the reason I had to leave school that early was also because late in February, the 20 something, I can't remember the exact date right now, the Academic Staff Union of Universities, of course, Nigerian public universities, went on strike. So lectures were on hold, university calendar was disrupted, and everything stopped. Everything came to a grinding halt. Word went out that the hostels were going to be closed in a couple of weeks' time, and so all my pressing assignments had been taken care of, right? My exams, the results was already out by then for almost a month anyway, so I knew I passed already. I wouldn't be writing any receipt exams or any makeup exams, so I was done with that. The magazine was launched, it was done and dusted, and it was launched already, so I had no problems with that anymore. The assignment I have for the family event, I finished it right here in school, but a couple of days to the family event, I left school, of course, to see if hands were needed back home, so I had to leave school and head back home. Anyways, so that was it with March. So March went with me heading home and getting stuck there basically for the next 8 months or so. Right, so I would like to, at this point, wade into the issue of the strike. The necessity of it. Was it necessary? Who was to blame for the length? What are my views on the strike generally? Am I in support? Was I in support? Am I still in support? What could have been done to avoid it? What can be done to avoid a recurrence of it? But I suppose the other topic is worthy of an entire episode or couple of episodes of its own on the podcast. And wading into that right now would mean spending a couple of hours or probably on this particular episode, and I wouldn't want to put my listeners through that right now. But I promise, I already started work on an episode on strikes in Nigeria before the podcast went on hiatus. So I suppose I might just have to bring that back, revive that. turn it into a proper script for an episode or two for the podcast. So we'll get to talk about it. Basically, I was in support of the strike. I'm in support of workers getting their rights and all that. And screw the federal government. They are to blame. In my view, they are to blame. But why do I think that? Why was I in support of the strike? Will I be in support of another strike? I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't like another strike to happen, but I don't know. If it has to happen, it's always going to happen, right? If the government, the employers are not helping matters, what power do the workers have? But to make their grievances known, of course. How do the workers make their grievances known? By not doing the job. But let's not go into all that talk right now to prevent the unnecessary elongation of this particular episode. But then I believe we will come back to talk about it some other time. So, anyways, the strike happened late February. I left school, I was home March. So what was it I was saying at home in March? Well, I had nowhere to go, of course. I was stuck at home. So of course I had to do my part. I was helping out at home with family business. Don't ask me what that is, but it's a family business, right? So I was helping out with it. And that's what I got stuck doing. Throughout the months of March, April, I was out there, over there in the street. Street life. That was that March, April, May found me still working at the family business. I'm at home, right? I can't get to sit down at home while my folks get to wake up every morning, get into the street and get things done. And I had studying to do. I had the podcast to continue. I had episodes to develop, scripts to write. But all that had to wait. I was at home, not in school. I had to attend to home issues. When in school, we could, write episodes of the podcast, get things done. So I was mostly helping out over there. But although that took up most of my time there, I still had other things I was working on. For example, the national body for my department's student association. I actually happen to belong to a committee there too. And we were tasked with creating and developing a podcast for the students union, students association rather. And I happened to be on the committee, and I helped to write and develop a couple of episodes for that. I also hosted a couple of episodes on that. So that took up some time between April and May, if I remember correctly. I think even beyond then, I still worked on a couple of episodes. I edited a couple of episodes that I didn't actually host or script. And that went by with time, of course. So I was basically busy, apart from working in the said family business. So the month of May had me stressed out and a bit feeling unaccomplished, having to sit at the business place for the whole day. It was grueling work, right? I wouldn't want to go into details about it right now. It was basically a 15 to 16, sometimes 17-hour work day. So it wasn't easy, but of course the uneasiness of it was not what was getting me depressed. It was the fact that I wasn't able to work on this bunch of other things that I would like to devote my time to. This podcast inclusive. So with me meeting me still unable to work on any of my own personal projects, I became basically restless. So I decided to maybe spread my wings out there, put word out there that I would like an outside job. So I had my eyes on a couple of places. I'm a graphic designer, as I said earlier on, graphic designer by trade. And where I live on my street here, it's a well-known place for everything, printing and printing adjacent jobs. So we have printing shops all over, we have graphic design places and stuff. So I had my eyes on a couple of places, including my old boss's place, where I actually got to develop my graphic design skills. I had other places, other options too, of course, including a large format printing place. But before I could make up my mind to work in either of those places, I got a job offer from an old friend. It was a teaching job offer, and teaching has always been a passion of mine, right? I've always liked to share my knowledge with other people, right? It's one of my core beliefs, my core principles, that the dissemination of information, of knowledge. If you got to learn something, you should always be free. It's a responsibility of you after learning a thing to always look forward to sharing that knowledge with other people. It's a responsibility, irrespective of whether you're being paid for it or not. I believe, for example, that if I learn a skill and I get to see someone who is in need of that skill, of knowledge of that skill, and the person comes asking to be put through with my knowledge of that skill, it's a responsibility on me at that point to actually impart the knowledge as best I could at that particular time on the asker. It's a principle I hold there. Share knowledge without cost. I'm not saying teachers should go on teaching without getting paid. No, that's a different thing entirely. If you're employing a person to teach students for you, you're charging the students for attending your school, you have to pay the teachers. You're employing a person to do a job, you have to pay the person. Of course, the issue of how much you pay them, that's for the economists to decide, right? What is the value of a job that's being done? How do you determine the value of a service? The amount you pay them, that's a different topic entirely. But should you pay them? Absolutely. You're paying them for their time, you're paying them for their service, you're paying them because it took time and so many other resources, their energy, their youth to actually learn that skill, to learn the knowledge that they will be imparting to others, to learn the skill that it takes to teach. Right, so of course, that's my point entirely. That teaching has always been a passion of mine. Teaching is a passion. Is a thing people can be passionate about, even if they want to get paid to do it. And that's why we have good teachers and bad teachers. Right? That's why we all have our favorite teachers in school, and we have our worst teachers in school. Right? Because some people actually have passion for the job, and when they get to do the job, even if they require payment for it, they do the job passionately. And so people, even when they're getting paid for it, I actually get to be so dispassionate doing the job, you end up just hating them. Doesn't matter if they actually possess the prerequisite knowledge or not, they get to do a shoddy job of it. So that's just a little clarification on that. So yeah, I got a job offer, and I basically didn't have to think twice about it, right? I gave my answer in the general manner of, yes, of course, I'll do the job. Definitely I will have to come in, speak with whoever is offering the job, iron out terms, what will be required of me, what subjects am I taking and stuff like that. So basically, yeah, the next day after I got the call, I went over to the school and discussed terms with the principal, of course, and I was going to be taking science subject. So I took the job. It's students in need of someone to impart knowledge on them, and here I am having some time on my hand, so I took the job. I started the job in the middle of May, if I remember correctly, and that was it. That was the beginning of my little adventure as Uncle Scientist. And to be clear about it, I said teaching has been a passion of mine. I've actually had previous stints as a teacher before. That was many years ago at my alma mater. So this gets to be a different experience. And besides, my experience with teaching was so many years ago. So I took this job mid-May, and looking back at it now, it wasn't a bad decision. But I was teaching at this school, and I was reflecting about the nature of Nigerian education as a whole. And I remember back when I was in secondary school, right, I used to lament about the state of my school, the state of education as a whole. That was even when I developed my passion for teaching, because I got to look around like the quality of education we generally receive was so low. I had good teachers. I was lucky. I had good teachers. But then it takes more than just having good teachers to get the right education, right? You need the right materials. Teachers need the right materials. Right? You're a science teacher, you're a science student. You need equipment in the lab, for example. Right? You need proper tools for a teacher to be able to put you through with things. So as bad as things were back then, things were plain horrible at the school I went to teaching. It's terrible. I can't delve into details about it now, but it was awful. The students had been starved of basic instructional material for so long. They've been starved of basic mentorship, basic tutelage in the most basic aspect, the most basic subject, the most basic topics. I spent half of my time there trying to cover basic concepts with the students. It was particularly depressing at times, being there at the school, and I don't know. So it was bad. It was pretty bad. My experience there. I tried my best, of course, and I believe the students also had a good time of it. I tried to impart as much as I could in terms of my philosophy, my outlook, try to inspire the students, try to set them on the right path to help themselves, get them to not have to always rely on external instruction to get to advance in their quest for knowledge and their quest for intellectual advancement. So I tried my best to put them through with that, and hopefully it stuck with them, hopefully it gets to stick with them, hopefully they get to use some of my attempted inspiration. Just to clarify, of course, I don't know how much clarification this would need for any Nigerian listening to this episode, but of course it was a private school, right? You have very little chance of getting an employment like that in the public sector, but it was a private school. And it got me reflecting. Going back again to my days in the secondary school, one of our favorite debate topics was between private schools and public schools, which was better, which was more beneficial to children and to students. This was always a hot topic anytime it was brought up amongst we students back in the day. So with my recent stint as a teacher, of course, I saw myself thinking back to those days, to those age-old debates, and I just don't know. I don't have a clear-cut answer right now. Of course, given the state of the country we're in, the public schools generally, are usually underfunded, or at least stereotype is the public schools here are underfunded. When you hear the stereotype of students sitting in the floor to learn, sitting under the tree because their classrooms lack basic roofing over their heads to protect them from the elements, when you hear that stereotype, of course you think of public schools, which gets to be mostly true. But that doesn't mean that the private schools are always better off. My secondary school was a private school. It wasn't a horrible school. It wasn't that bad. I didn't have to sit on the floor at any point in time. But of course, there were horrible experiences too. There were bad experiences too. For example, it took serious push from the students for the school to start a pathetic attempt at a library, which was basically just a shelf. When it was created, it was basically just a shelf with books in one of the teachers' office. That was back in my day. I'm not sure for how many sessions that library lasted in that particular school, right? And I thought I had it bad, but goodness, these students have it way worse than that, right? Yeah, they basically don't have any library. Even teachers for the basic subjects, we are a rarity in this particular school. So I got thinking, the whole rationale of taking these kids to private school was so as to afford them better learning conditions, better learning environment. Private schools are supposed to have better tools, better teaching and learning tools to afford the students. The idea of a private school, not having the right teachers for the job, not having the right learning materials, not having the right learning environment, just defeats the whole purpose of the whole thing. And I wonder what is it with these private schools anyway? What is it with them? What is it with the government agencies, the agencies that are supposed to oversee their activities? What are their purposes, and why is it nobody doing anything about their state, the general state? I know, basically the worst private schools, of course, are the low cost ones, the one that the poor people get to attend, right? So you basically have poor people who are so poor they can't attend the bad private schools, so they have to attend the free public schools, which of course you just have to take whatever you get as it comes. And then if you can afford anything above that, you go for an affordable private school, which always ends up being particularly shitty. It's terrible what these kids have to go through. Spend 6 years in a school and you end up basically getting shortchanged. It's 6 years of this kid's life that they're never getting back. It's their formative years, for God's sake. And you have people running schools that just end up basically, I don't know, almost, I want to say they're ruining this kid's life, because that's basically what they're doing. It sounds a bit melodramatic, but that's what's happening at this badly supervised, badly managed private schools. The public schools too, the poorly funded, badly supervised public schools. But then my experience was in a private school, so I'm talking about that in particular now. These people are destroying the future of this nation. Back in my secondary school days, when I started thinking about, the basic primary source of the issues we have in this country, I usually pin it down to the bad education, right? The bad education system. My belief then, and still to some point my belief now, is that if you can fix the education system, teach the people to know better, to do better, then that will cure the primary problem of the country, the primary issue with the country, and then every other thing can start getting addressed with that as the focal point. Once you address the problem of ignorance, basically, you start to address other things. I don't necessarily believe that is the source of the problem right now, because, well, we have many learned people in position today, as we will see when I get to discuss some issues, particularly from our next episode. But we have learned people in position today, and our problem is not that of the stupidity of or the total ignorance of people in power. Yeah, we have ignorant people in power, we have stupid people in power, but that isn't the problem. Even the people, the knowledge people who have in power today, still get to do wicked stuff, still get to be wicked when they act, in their policies, in their actions. So I don't necessarily have that same position today that the primary problem in the country is that of ignorance, the ignorance or the stupidity of the populace. No. So to have this now, these people just basically ruining the chance that these kids have at having an early spring in life. It was disheartening to me. It's still disheartening to me. I did my best at the job, but it was obvious I couldn't last at that job. There are just so many issues with the administration of the schools, of that particular school. Anyways, so by the end of July, if you're familiar with the primary and secondary school calendar here in Nigeria, the school year ends in August, right? So basically you're supposed to end the curriculum by the end of July and early August. So by the end of July, it was obvious that I couldn't go on with the job. So my reign as science teacher at that school ended. By the end of July, I rounded up my coursework with the students. I set up exam questions and editing. I couldn't continue with that at that point. Alright, so getting back to the street at the beginning of August, end of July, beginning of August, I have answered to one of my passions, teaching. So I have to answer to some of my other passions at that point, right? The hope then was, okay, if I get to do this other job, I might get some free time on my hand to get some of these other things done. So beginning of August, I switched up, headed back to my old boss's place. It was all welcomes and kumbaya. And yeah. Hey boss, if you're listening to this, thanks a lot. Thanks for always having me. I'm grateful. And she had me, I met with nothing but open arms, of course. So I was back there. At this particular point, I wasn't going to be working for pay. Basically, I wasn't even working for her at that point. I was basically just using her shop as a base for my operations. So the plan was write a couple of episodes for the podcast, get writing done, some of your writings. I had a couple of design projects I had in mind, principal of which is the new notes series I was working on. What that is there was this notebook series that back in 2020 I designed this notebook series. I designed the covers, designed the innards, and then I had it printed and print a couple of dozen copies. So I was working to make new designs and make improvements to the old designs. So as I set to work, of course, as I resumed work at my old boss's place, that was the big idea there, to get some writing done, get some scripting done, and then primarily get the designs done. So that's how August met me. So at the end of the first week of August, it was when the first of a series of calamities struck. I still remember that particular day. It was a Sunday. I remember the last video I got to see on my old phone on that Sunday. It was a video of Keith Daniels' interview at the breakfast show with Charlemagne the God and his folks there. So yeah, that was the last video I got to see on my old phone. On August the 7th, I was working at the said family business. That Sunday, my phone had been faulty for a while. It wasn't charging properly, so I had to leave it plugged in to charge while I step out to handle some other business. Came back in, phone was gone, nowhere to be found, and that was that about that. My old phone gone. Just disheartening for the most part. The phone had been giving me issues for a while. I've spent more time hating on that phone than actually being glad for having it. But still, I had it, and it served while I still had it. But then on August 7th, I lost it. It got stolen. And by the way, all the previous episodes, the episode 1 to 7 of the podcast, was recorded on that phone before I get to transfer the audio files to my laptop for the editing and uploading. So it was a horrible thing to happen. The phone was my communication channel with the outside world. I mean, I've been stuck at this point in time in August. I've been stuck at home for how long now? 4 or 5 months. That was how I get to be in touch with the outside world, to just lose it of a sudden like that. I had no preparation for it. Yeah, thank God I've always been steadfast with my backups, so I had a pretty recent backup. But even the most recent backup at the time the phone got stolen was months old, but it was mostly accurate, mostly complete, and of course my accounts were secured, right? So most of my accounts wouldn't be that hard to recover. By the way, at this point, I would like to say that to get more details about how I got to come back from the loss of my phone, even though till this point, till today, right, I still haven't gotten a replacement for it. Everything I've done ever since I've been on my laptop. So to get more details on how I got to do that and how you could get to protect yourself against, say, unforeseen happenings like losing your phone, for example, or anything could happen to the phone, I would suggest at this point that I have been working for a while now on creating a new podcast with a good friend of mine, a fellow student here too. He's been a guest on the show before in episode 5 in particular. So there's a new podcast, it's coming up. I suppose by the time this particular episode gets uploaded, that podcast should be about a week or 2 from going online. By the way, whenever that happens, I'll be sure to intimate you. And that podcast anyways would be about IT, trying to talk about the tech scene in Nigeria, talking about tech issues, tech fixes. So yeah, to get more idea about what I was saying about how to get back from a setback such as losing your phone, your device, or your phone crashing, dying on you, how to prepare against that and how to get up from that if it happens. I'll be discussing that in one of the early topics, I should think, in that podcast when it eventually comes online. Like I said, when that eventually happens, I'll let you all know about that. So anyways, that's the 7th of August. It happened. I lost the phone that day. The very next day after that, I went into the market just to see the general state of things. And oh goodness, inflation is a terrible thing. Oh, inflation is bad. It's bad. It's bad. Inflation in the country, it's bad now. It was bad then. It was horrible. Phone prices right now are just they're sky high. I went in there and I basically came back knowing that there was no way I was going to be getting a phone anytime soon. So I hope I've been able to paint a general picture of why the podcast didn't come back online from December till August. Basically, from August onward, the main reason the podcast couldn't get on air, at least now we have a scapegoat, right? So there you have it. There you have your villain, your scapegoat, in case you need one. Yeah, stole my phone, and that's basically what's been stolen recording ever since. If you decide to go with that excuse. But yeah, of course, basically, phone was gone and I had to get a replacement. So what did I do? I decided to get a modem instead, so I could get back online using my laptop. Of course, my laptop, by the way, was a different story entirely. Back in December last year, December 2021, my laptop developed an issue when I was editing one of the podcast episodes, and there was a spark. I didn't know exactly where the spark came from. Anyways, it stopped charging. I couldn't figure out what's wrong with it. I decided to remove the battery and just use it straight up from the mains, directly like that. So I had been using it like that since December till that point. Well, that was what I was left with anyway. So I bought a modem to use with my laptop to get back online and see what could be salvaged. I hadn't been online on my laptop since I stopped uploading the podcast episode. I was in late November, December the previous year. I hadn't really gotten online with the laptop since then. So getting back online on laptop after getting the modem, I got notifications for OS updates for the Ubuntu Studio I was running on it. So I got notification for the updates. Click on the updates. Update was downloading. It downloaded. Install starts, and the system crashed before the update could be installed successfully. Turns out my hard disk drive was almost full by the time the download started. The system probably couldn't finish the download because of the filled up memory, or maybe the download finished and then the install couldn't happen successfully because the memory was filled up. Anyways, the system crashed. And if you have any experience with using Linux, you'll understand what kind of headache I had to go through in order to back up my stuff from my hard drive before attempting the clean reinstall. Well, the crux of the issue is that Windows systems cannot read the file system on Linux. So different types of operating systems have different file structures. On Windows, you mostly have the FAT and NTFS. The NTFS is the default Windows file structure, but Windows also recognize the FAT and exFAT and a couple of file structures like that. The file structure on Linux systems is not recognized by Windows. So basically what that means is, to back up my stuff, to back off my hard drive, I had to plug it in externally to a computer and then plug a different hard drive that I'll be transferring my files to into a different port on the same computer, and then transfer my stuff from my hard drive to the backup hard drive. Now, I couldn't do that with just any computer, with just any Windows computer, which is of course the most common computer you can find around. I had to find a computer that's running a Linux distro, basically one that works well with the file system on the distro I was using, the Ubuntu Studio. That was a headache. It took me a week, a bit more than a week actually, to get hold of a Linux system from one of my buddies there in school. I had to get hold of them, get their system, borrow it for a day, a couple of days. I had to get hold of a backup hard drive from another of my friends. So I finally got the backup done. So I felt safe then to do the clean restore. I decided to go with the new version of Ubuntu Studio. I installed it. Turns out I didn't have to go through the headache of the backup, but I'm glad I did anyways. It's better to be safe than sorry. So I didn't have to, because during the install process I had the option to just install the new OS into the partition that the old OS was in, so my files were safe. Only the OS partition was erased and then rewritten with the new OS. But then, like I said, it's better to be safe than sorry. I'm not sorry I went through all the trouble of doing a backup, but it turned out I didn't need to do that. So this took up the next 2 weeks of August. By mid-August, the laptop was back up and running, except that the laptop still had its issues, right? It still wouldn't charge the batteries, so I still had that to deal with. If I was going to be relying on my laptop now, I needed to fix that. So I got up and I fixed it. Well, I've been working on finding a solution for this. I asked a couple of people, a couple of repair guys, what they think would be the problem. In fact, the laptop actually spent over 2 weeks at one of the repair guys' place, and he basically couldn't come up with any satisfactory answer at the end of that period, and I just had to take my laptop back from him. So I basically decided to just do a trial and error, went with my laptop into the market, a couple of shops, searched for the battery. It's a very old model, about a decade old at this point, so it was pretty hard getting the parts that are there for it. So I went to the market, searched for the battery. It was a hard search, so I bought the charger and the battery. It cost me a pretty penny, but then I was glad at least I have that problem solved. Now I can truly rely on the system, right? I can truly work with it. If I'm going to start on a system that will be dying on me every time the light goes off, like it does frequently around here. Of course, if you're Nigerian, you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, I got my system back. Stable, reliable, at least reasonably so. The battery wouldn't last for more than an hour 30 when it stops without power, but that's enough at least for me to round up whatever work I have going on it at that particular point in time, and to save it, round up, save, and then wait for when next power comes back on. So I think that was mostly it for August. So I spent August, the month of August, in my old boss's place, getting some work done, and still not podcast, right? Anyway, so by the last few days of August, I got a new job offer. It's from a graphic design shop, a newly created graphic design shop. I like to take that job, but some things came up, and it turns out I wouldn't like to work at that particular place, so I had to turn it down. I turned it down, and then immediately afterwards, I discovered there was an opening at the other place I had in mind before, the large format print shop. I would have liked the name drop that particular shop here now, but I think I'll just skip that for now. So I discovered there was an opening there, I was accepted, and by the first day of September, I started my work there. So I had previous experience working as a graphic designer in a different shop, but then in a new shop here, they did large format printing. So this was a different ball game. I had no prior experience working in a place like this before, except that of course I had the graphic design experience. So I had to go through a period of training for the first couple of weeks in September. That took the first couple of weeks in September, and then by the third week of September, I was working as a full staff. So the new place, it was really eye-opening. I know I met some really awesome guys. Shout out to you guys, by the way. If you're listening in here and you know I'm referring to you, shout out to you. You guys are really great over there. I learned a couple new tricks from them. Yeah, so September went by, so October came in with the Independence Day, the festivities and all, the buzz, the reflections. I wrote a little piece on the Independence Day commemoration, the anniversary. Maybe I'll probably dig that up sometime soon, and maybe we'll discuss it on one of our subsequent episodes. We say about that. It's a pretty interesting piece about our independence and the look ahead, what things are looking like to be for the country in the near future. Particularly, we talk of the privatization of public properties and stuff. One of the most disturbing trends with the coming election has been the attitude of most, if not all, of the candidates when they asked about their possible solutions, their particular outlook on how to solve many of the problems bedeviling the nation. Their go-to solution has always been and still remains privatization. So privatize the power plants, privatize the distribution plants. We know there have been some privatization going on before, so you do even more privatization. I mean, come on, dog. There have been so much privatization that has been carried out in that sector already. The distribution companies are mostly in private hands right now, and yet these private companies are still getting bailed out by the federal government at this very point in time. And you're saying that the solution to this problem is even more privatization. We'll have to talk about that comprehensively on a subsequent episode, but basically at this point it has worked for us. There's a couple of instances they like to give as an example to point to as a success of privatization, talking about the mobile networks and stuff. But no, that isn't privatization that took place then. It was basically just licensing, right? They bought licenses and they started their operations. The company that was privatized, the former Nigerian telecommunications company, the Nitel, was privatized. Where is it today? It does not exist. It was privatized and the people who bought it sold it for scraps. That company does not exist today, and that is one of the reasons broadband internet is basically terrible in the country, because the company was privatized and the assets weren't developed. The person who bought it just sold it for scraps and let the whole thing rot, just let the whole system rot, and we all suffer for it today. So why would we keep thinking that this system that didn't work for us in the past isn't working for us in the present? It should be the way forward for us as a nation. It's almost like we just are not thinking of alternate ways to solve these problems of ours, which is, of course, one of the purposes of this podcast, like I said, to look at things that have already been done, proposed as solutions for problems of the country, and see why they are not working, why they didn't work, and then come up with other ideas, right? For one, come up with other ways, other definitions of what the problem with the country is, and given that, we can then find the alternate solutions, right? If you redefine the problem and come up with a different definition than someone else came up with, then of course you'll be coming up with a different solution to that problem. And that's what the political parties in the country, if you call them that, that's one work that they're not doing. We don't basically have any proper political party in the country right now. They're all just basically different copies of the same basic blueprint set up to just milk the country of its resources. They're just cronies moving about like a union of vandals and rascals. That's basically what the so-called political parties we have in the country are today. So mid of October, the news came to town that the strike, the 8-month-old strike at that point, might be getting called off very soon. I think one of the most pressing indications was when the industrial court came up with the judgment, which I still don't understand how an industrial court came up with such judgment, unilaterally coming up with the decision of asking the striking workers to go back to work without asking their employers to settle and placate their grievances. So there was that, and then followed by the appeal process failing. The appeal court basically stating that the striking workers have to resume work before they can appeal the judgment of the lesser court, the industrial court. It was all ridiculous to me back then, but then what could we do? For me, I was quite just glad that the strike was finally over and we could finally get back to school and get going once again. But I wasn't glad of the way the issue was addressed then, of course, because that was just postponing the problem, right? You didn't cure it, it just glaze over it a bit temporary for the time being and save it for the near future, not even the far future. Already as we are now, this is barely 2 months over, there is still talk of the strike coming back. And well, while we hoping that something gets done to prevent that from happening, I know if nothing gets done, then that will still have to happen. So that's mostly that about that. And going through the stories, the strike was called off mid to late October. By the last week of October, it was announced that most of the public universities in the country called their students back, that their academic work was to resume. Yeah, and it did resume in most of the universities by the 24th of October, I think, probably earlier in some other schools. So by the last week of October, I was saying goodbye to my new workplace. There are a number of things I missed out here, of course, including that by the middle of September, I had to make some major changes to my workstation, my laptop. That included that I had to get Windows back in, but I didn't trust Windows to run well on my hard drive, and I had stuff on the hard drive that I wouldn't want to lose anyway, so I had to get a new hard drive, install Windows on that. I also got to work a fix, so I started emulating Android on the Windows install now. So I got an Android emulator that works quite well. I also worked on the RAM. I added a couple gigs of RAM to the laptop just to help things run more stably and more reliably. And yeah, it's been working well so far. So basically, I've been using my laptop as my phone for the past couple of months now. So October ended, and with the end of October it became obvious, before then anyways, it became obvious we had to go back to school. So I got my preparation done. So by the 30th of October I was back in school, preparing for coursework, and started working on this particular episode and the previous one, the announcement episode, and this one. I finished work on that, got the episode ready, but still couldn't record because the mic on my laptop doesn't work. So what to do? I had to get a mic, but an external mic. I ordered that online. It arrived a week later. I tried recording the episode. I tried once. I tried twice. So I just basically shared project for weeks. Schoolwork had been quite gruesome this past month or so. I waited for weeks, and well, here I am. And then it's night, in case you're wondering why I sound whispery and sleepy. And hopefully I'll be able to round things up with the editing by the end of this week, and then I'll be uploading this. So that's basically how my year has been the past year, the hiatus, the break. I hope you understand why we had to go on the break and what the podcast has been on. Your host has been on, in the past year or so. You at least share some understanding now of what I meant when I said at the beginning that it's been a tough, long year. It's been a long, eventful year. And yeah, the podcast is back, and hopefully by the time this goes up, the next episode will be ready. So the next episode will be mostly revisiting episode 7, because I would like to go back to that and try to expand that episode a little bit, discuss in much simpler terms some of the concepts that we discussed in that episode 7, and try to understand that whole issue, and yeah, from there build the foundation that the subsequent episodes of the podcast will be built upon, basically. So yeah, that's it. So you're welcome once more to 0100 Niger. Thanks if you've listened to the podcast to this point, and well, this is Leftist Scientist signing out. Hope to catch you on the next one. Thanks.